Om Tavagatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimatatam Bhuivaranti Purirajana. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone, to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're starting a new chapter. This is chapter 17M at Dakshineswar, part 1. And there have been a couple of smaller chapters, but it's all part of this one long stay that M had at Dakshineswar with Sri Ramakrishna. I don't know why exactly they split it up this way. Possibly because not all of the sections were contained in volume 1. When M wrote the gospel in the beginning, he did it in stages. So possibly part of it was in one, part of it was in another, and when they collected it, it came out into different chapters. But it's really, in terms of M's life, it's one long chapter. This special stay at Dakshineswar with Sri Ramakrishna. So we're on page 348. And it's Tuesday, December 18th, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna was seated in his room with his devotees. He spoke highly of Devendranath Tagore's love of God and renunciation, and then said, pointing to Akal and the other young devotees, Devendra is a good man, but blessed indeed are those young aspirants who, like Shukadeva, practice renunciation from their very boyhood and think of God day and night without being involved in worldly life. Now, this is December 1883. When did Sri Ramakrishna go to meet Tagore? Was it before this or after this? Satubhai, do you remember? Because this is important. I meant to look it up before. Let's see if it's in here. Tour 235. Yes. So this was after that. I don't know when exactly it was, but on June 5th, 1883, Sri Ramakrishna is talking about that visit that he had. It may have been much earlier, in fact. But in any event, we know it's interesting that Thakur is speaking so highly of Tagore's love of God and renunciation. When they met, it was an interesting visit. During Mathur Babu's time, yes, right. So it was much earlier. Yeah, I should have known that. Yeah, what happened? Oh, okay. What happened was, we know that Sri Ramakrishna had a great interest in meeting all of the important people, the pundits or religious leaders or social leaders, so that he met Vidyasagar, he met many of these the other pundits, Padmalocha and others, and so he had a desire to meet Devendranath Tagore, who was he was known as the Maharshi at that time. He was very, very well known. He was one of the most important figures, we can say, in the modern Bengal. And starting with Ram Mohan Roy, who we can say really was the initiator of the movement that grew into the Brahmo Samaj. And Devendranath was inspired by him. Swami Vivekananda spoke very, very highly of Ram Mohan Roy. He didn't mention him very many times, but he spoke very highly. He played a significant role in bringing the study of the Upanishads to Bengal, because he was the first to translate them and from Sanskrit into Bengali. And so that was very significant. Uh, it before that there wasn't so much interest in that type of study. More interest, I would say, in Bhagavata and Ramayana and other things like that. So he played a very important role, Devendranath. So that was the beginning. He was the founder of the original Brahmo Samaj, Adi Brahmo Samaj. And then Keshav Chandra Sen was inspired by him. So then he took over after that. And of course, we know Rabindranath was his most famous son of all the different sons that he had. And then there was the big split. So there were so many different versions. And then it became Sadharan Brahma Samaj and the Navavidhan, the new dispensation, all different things like that. But when Sri Ramakrishna wanted to see him, there were two ways that these things happened. One was he would ask Hridoy, and perhaps this was before Mathur's time. I don't remember, but he would say, "Go and meet this pandit. Go and meet this person, and tell them that your uncle thinks of God and would like to meet them." That's how he met Keshav also. And so this time it was Mathur he asked, and Mathur Babu he said he hesitated, and then he said, "Actually, we went to college together. They were classmates or something in college." So he said, "Okay." So they went, and Tagore spoke to him, a little bit impressed, and then he said, "Raise your shirt." He wanted to, because Tagore had this way of by and seeing somebody's physiognomy, huh? That by the shape of their head, shape of the chest, and everything, he could judge them. Anyhow, he had a nice impression of him, we can say, but then Thakur, sometimes he would say, "I got into that state where I can look into a man's heart and his mind as if looking at objects inside of a glass case." We sometimes wonder how Thakur could sometimes maybe misjudge people or would have to ask questions and everything. He wasn't always in that state. But sometimes he would say, "I got into that state." So then he saw that Devendranath, how much he had enjoyed the world also. But in any event, they talked about some spiritual things, and Thakur was impressed and everything. And then Tagore invited him to come to. There was an upcoming celebration, Brahma celebration, but he said a very interesting thing. He said, "But make sure that you wear some upper cloth." Thakur very often would just throw the bottom half of his dhoti over his shoulder. And he gave a very interesting reason. "It would hurt me very much if I found other people being critical of you." It's a little bit disingenuous the way he did that. So then Thakur said, "How I can be a babu, I can't promise. I don't know when my cloth is on my body or not." It's something like that. So then they left amicably, and he said the next day a letter came telling him not to come. So that anybody else would have taken that a little bit personally, but here Thakur is just praising him, his love of God, and about his renunciation. He said, "Yeah, he renounced. Who enjoyed the world more than he did? Of course. After that, you can easy to renounce." And then he gave the example of the man who stopped this elaborate Durga Puja with offering of goats and all of that. Why? Because his teeth had all fallen out. He couldn't chew the meat anymore. So he's comparing it a little bit to that. But anyhow, Devendranath, he played a very important role. And he and others like him, Vidyasagar, social reformers and also spiritual leaders, both. So they tried to combine both things. But, and this is, now he's comparing Devendranath and Rakal. And we know very often he would compare Keshav and Swamiji and Narendra. And here are two of the most famous figures, the two young boys who were nobody at that time. And Narendra Swamiji, he used to complain, "How do you compare me to Keshav?" They said, "No, I know that if he has, one virtue, you have 18 virtues," something like that. And he was right, of course. So Thakur, he could see the difference between those who renounced from childhood, from a young age, and those who at the end of life, after enjoying everything, renounced, because they were a very wealthy family, had big landowners. Yeah. The worldly man always has some desire or other, though at times he shows much devotion to God. Once, Mathur Babu was entangled in a lawsuit. He said to me in the shrine of Kali, "Sir, please offer this flower to the Divine Mother." I offered it unsuspectingly. See, and that was another case. We think that he always knew what was in the minds of people. Most of the time, he was in that mood of a child, that he wouldn't question things. He was very, some people would say gullible or naive, but just that simplicity. So he said, I offered it unsuspectingly, but he firmly believed that he would attain this objective if I offered the flower. What devotion Rati's mother had. Now, this is another interesting person. First of all, it was very common in those days, even today, to a certain extent, to not refer to a respected person or an elderly person by their name. So very often they'll say somebody's mother. Even Holy Mother, Thakur always said Ramlal's aunt. He never called her by name. So Rati's mother, the interesting thing about her is that when Thakur went into samadhi, and we know there are 3 different times when he heard the voice of the Divine Mother say, remain in Bhavamukha. One of them, he said that Mother came in the form of Rati's mother to do that. Another time was some man with a long beard, and the last time it was just the words. He didn't see. That was when he was in that nirvikalpa samadhi state. So Thakur had some type of regard for this Rati's mother, whoever she was. She had a connection with Vaishnav Charan. Let me see. I wanted to say a little bit. Huh? Huh? Later. Okay. Okay. Yeah, she belonged to this Korita Bhaja Sampradaya and was Gauda Vaishnavi. That means that she was a little bit orthodox and fanatical. Now, it's surprising because this isn't a typical Orthodox group. We know this Vaishnav Charan's group, that they would take wine and do other things. But at the same time, she was a very strict vegetarian and followed some other kind of strict rules. So it was a funny kind of combination between the two. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it says Oti Shudhachari. So she led a very pure type of life, but they didn't lead a very pure type of life. They would do all sorts of kind of tantric types of practices and things. It says Thakur one time saw Bhavatarani, the Mother Kali, dressed as Rati's mother in ecstasy. But she was very orthodox. So we'll find out what happened with her, with catching Thakur taking non-vegetarian food. Anyhow, what devotion Rati's mother had, how often she used to come here, and how much she served me. So they had some real connection at one time. We don't know much about her afterwards. She was a Vaishnava. One day she noticed that I ate the food offered at the Kali temple. That means non-vegetarian. The Rani, Rashmani, she had an arrangement so that those who took strict vegetarian food would get the prasad from the Radhakanta temple, and those who took non-vegetarian could take from the Kali temple. So one day she noticed that I ate the food offered at the Kali temple, and that stopped her coming. Her devotion to God was one-sided. It isn't possible to understand a person right away. So this is a second case we see that the Thakur, uh, he gets an impression of somebody, and unless, as I said, he gets into that mood and kind of looks deep within them, he just accepts people like a child, without overly judging or he didn't have a suspicious mind at all, very pure type of mind. It was a winter morning, and the master was sitting near the east door of his room, wrapped in his moleskin shawl. He looked at the sun and suddenly went into samadhi. Now we know that the sun has so many associations with the Brahman, and as a Brahmin boy, he had his sacred thread ceremony and Gayatri Mantra and worshipping the sun. So all the connections with the sun as will bring some spiritual awakening. So he looked at the sun and suddenly went into samadhi. His eyes stopped blinking and he lost all consciousness of the outer world. So this samadhi, we know, is so many different types. The one thing they all have in common is that there's no consciousness of the outer world. What's happening within, that we don't know, and this Thakur will tell us afterwards. Otherwise, that's not information that's available to us. It may be the mind is perfectly empty, nirvikalpa samadhi, or there's some visions, or all sorts of things happen. After a long time, he came down to the plane of the sense world. Rakal, Hazara M, and other devotees were seated near him. Master to Hazara. The state of samadhi is certainly inspired by love. Now, this means that Sri Ramakrishna is definitely including within the term samadhi, bhava samadhi. This bhava samadhi is more something we see in the devotional schools. We don't find this term in our yoga systems or anything. Bhava samadhi, this will be just filled so much with love and devotion for God that one loses all awareness of the external world, maybe visions taking place inside. We don't know exactly, but it won't be our strict nirvikalpa samadhi that we find in the yoga system and other systems. So the state of samadhi is certainly inspired by love. Once at Shambhazar, they arranged a kirtan at Nottabar Goswami's house. There I had a vision of Krishna and the gopis of Vrindavan. So that'll also be a type of bhava samadhi, when he has these visions, when he's not aware of the outer world. He loses all outer consciousness. Senses aren't functioning at that time. I felt that my subtle body was walking at Krishna's heels. I went into samadhi when similar devotional songs were sung at the Harisabha at Jorishanko in Calcutta. That day they feared I might give up the body. See, Thakur went to all of these different places. Whenever there was any, it didn't make any difference. This would be Vaishnava group, but it didn't matter to him. Jorishanko, where is that? Yeah.
Jorishanko is in, yes, Kegosa.
But this will be the Harisabha in Jorishanko, so in that same area. But that day they feared I might give up the body. See, when Thakur would get into the state of samadhi, if it lasted a long time, they would have trouble seeing any signs of life. That you could hardly feel any pulse, hardly see any breathing and everything. Even body would get a little cold. That's why when he passed away, they really for long hours, they thought that perhaps it was just a deep state of samadhi. And they did all sorts of things to bring consciousness back. They rubbed ghee on his back and and tried to bring down the Kundalini, all sorts of things, till finally Dr. Sharkar said no, that his body is gone, that he's passed away. Even Swamiji, when he had his samadhi in the Kashipur, the Buddha Gopal, the elder Gopal, he had some fear that Swamiji was dying. And Swamiji cried out, something like that. He went to Sri Ramakrishna. So this is another sign. And we know that one time, one of the doctors, Bhaduri, maybe one of them, he actually pressed his finger to Sri Ramakrishna's eyeball. He just did such a sensitive thing to see if there was any reaction. So that means that even somehow the prana and the connection between the sense of touch and everything is disconnected at that time. There were no signs of life at all at that time. And then gradually the mind comes down. After the master had finished his bath, he again spoke of the ecstatic love of the gopis. He said to M and the other devotees, one should accept the fervent attachment of the gopis to their beloved Krishna. Now, this is a statement that he used to make to Keshav and the Brahmos, that even if you don't believe in this Krishna Lila, even if you don't believe that this actually took place, that this is all a myth, it's all made up, still try to imagine that longing that the gopis had for Sri Krishna when they were separated from him, there's Viraha Bhava, and the joy they had when they were in union with him, that Milana Bhava, these two different moods that we find in the Vaishnava tradition. So this is very nice. This is what Thakur used to call arop kora, to try to adopt that attitude, try to feel the way, or try to imagine how would Radha feel when she was longing to see Sri Krishna. If we try to imagine that, that means that we'll feel that. So he's saying that try to superimpose that mindset that Radha had onto our own mindset somehow. Arop-kara. So that we can also feel that yearning and longing. If we can identify, this is part of that whole system of the different bhavas, identify with the ideal worshiper, with Radha, and then we can feel that same longing that she had to realize Krishna. And for Thakur, the longing was the main thing. So here he's telling them also, this is the very same thing that he says to Keshav on another occasion. So one should accept the fervent attachment of the gopis to their beloved Krishna. Sing songs like this. Tell me, friend, how far is the grove where Krishna, my beloved, dwells? His fragrance reaches me even here, but I am tired and can walk no farther. Again he sang, I am not going home, O friend, for there it is hard for me to chant my Krishna's name. Sri Ramakrishna had vowed to offer green coconut and sugar to Siddheshwari, the Divine Mother, for Rakal's welfare. Now, this is that same temple, the Tontonia, Kalivari, that is very close to M's house. And this was in the family of Swami Subodhananda. This is exactly what he did for Keshav. And he used to ask M to do it, to buy some this dab chini, this sugar and coconut water, green coconut water, and offer it. Why he's saying for Rakal's welfare, I really don't know. Rakal is no longer, when he was in Vrindavan and he was very ill. Maybe he's still not over his illness, but he's there. He's present there. So I really don't know. Huh? If it has to do with his marriage, that let him not be too attached to the world. But he never seemed too concerned about the marriage. He never expressed too much. In fact, he even said, "Go home and have fun with your wife a little." And next thing you know, he had a son. Yeah. So he never seemed very, very concerned about that. So I don't really know. Satubhai, any theory? No, it's interesting, curious. You see, I've been reading this book for so many years, and it's never struck me before. This, so he asked M whether he would pay for the offerings. Hulka? The date. Oh, December 18th, 1883. That afternoon, the master, accompanied by M. Rakal and some other devotees, set out in a carriage for the temple of Siddheshwari in Calcutta. My last trip to India, for some reason, I spent a lot of time there. I was with Swami Devendranath, and one of his former teachers lived right near there. And we went a couple of times for him to see, and then finally he just went. And the whole time I went, I sat in the Kali temple. There's tremendous atmosphere, but it's right on the street corner. All the vendors are right there, busy, dirty, noisy, but tremendous atmosphere. Very old temple. Yeah.
Also easy to miss that temple.
You can miss it. Yeah, it looks like just another shop on the corner. Yeah, it's very small. Doesn't look like a temple or anything. I don't remember seeing anything special about the building, but a beautiful image inside and everything. And many people with great devotion go there. Yeah. So that afternoon, the master, accompanied by M. Rakal, see, he's even taking Rakal there. He must have been embarrassed. I don't know, offering for his sake. Rakal and some other devotees set out in the carriage for the temple of Siddheshwari in Calcutta. On the way, the offerings were purchased. On reaching the temple, the master asked the devotees to offer the fruit and sugar to the Divine Mother. They saw the priests and their friends playing cards in the temple. It's not unusual. These in India, the priests are not necessarily. This is their profession. Most of them are good people, of course, but they're not the ones who are supposed to be the keepers of the spiritual tradition. That the monks are supposed to do that, and they're mostly family people and everything. And this is the way they make their money and everything. And they have pass the time, play cards. So they saw the priests and their friends playing cards in the temple. Sri Ramakrishna said, to play cards in the temple, one should think of God here. From the temple, the master went to Jadu Malik's house. Now, all of these things are in that same neighborhood, and it's very close to where Sri Ramakrishna lived when he came with his brother, Ram Kumar, before they went to the Dakshineswar temple. And in Jadu Malik, we know him more from his garden house. See, the wealthy people, they would have a house in the city and they'd have a place in the country. His garden house was just past the southern gate of the Dakshineswar temple compound. So Thakur generally went to see him there, but now he's going to see him here. Jadu was surrounded by his admirers, well-dressed dandies. He welcomed the master. Jadu was very wealthy, a very wealthy person. And these people, they felt some special connection with Sri Ramakrishna, even though they weren't really very spiritual people. They had some interest, something, but they could have a friendship with him. I saw this with Swami Swahanandaji, that there were several that maybe the wife was a devotee, the husband didn't really care too much, but would love to spend time with them, just chit chat and talk about things and go for a walk. Who's here? Oh, okay, Satubhai, you're Doya Maida. Yeah, they had such a nice friendship. They would hang out together and everything. Otherwise, he didn't care too much. He wouldn't go for lectures and things like that, really. But they had that quality that they could just mix with anybody. So the Jadu Malik, he loved to have Sri Ramakrishna around, sometimes to show him off a little bit, maybe not all so sincerely and everything. His mother was a great devotee. Mother was highly devoted, and all of the servants and workers and everything, especially in the garden house, They all loved Sri Ramakrishna. So he could go whenever he wanted. He could just had free access to the house. And we know that's where he went. That the second visit, when Swamiji came, when he touched him and Swamiji lost consciousness, and he asked all of those questions. How long he would live, why he came, who he was before, all of those things, and satisfied him with all of the answers and everything. So there's a Leela, Thakur's Leela, has so many different little side excursions that we can go off on. So many nice little things. So he played an interesting role in Jadu Malik. Thakur, there are many instances, and Thakur always refers to him. That if you want to know how many properties and everything Jadu Malik has, you have to somehow meet him. Yeah. So if we want to know about God's creation, then we have to realize God first. So he would use this illustration of Jadu Malik. Master with a smile. Why do you keep so many clowns and flatterers with you? Jadu smiling, that you may liberate them. And laughter. Master, flatterers think that the rich man will loosen his purse strings for them, but it is very difficult to get anything from them. Once a jackal saw a bullock and would not give up his company. The bullock roamed about and the jackal followed him. The jackal thought, there hang the bullock's testicles. Sometime or other they will drop to the ground and I shall eat them. What an illustration. When the bullock slept on the ground, the jackal lay down too. And when the bullock moved about, the jackal followed him. Many days passed in this way, but the bullock's testicles still clung to his body. The jackal went away disappointed. All left. This also happens to flatterers. So Jadu, he wasn't about to get hold. He was always wanted to have more and more money. Jadu and his mother served refreshments to Sri Ramakrishna and the devotees. Now we get the next day, part of the same chapter, Wednesday, December 19th, 1883. So 9 o'clock in the morning. So this means that M again spent another night there, one after another during this vacation period. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. Sri Ramakrishna was talking to M near the bell tree at Dakshineswar. This tree, under which the master had practiced the most austere sadhana, stood in the northern end of the temple garden. When you go there, you can still see that the area is kept as a very sacred place. All of the tantric sadhana was done there under the Brahmani. So that the bell tree is considered very auspicious for the tantric sadhana. Farther north ran a high wall, and just outside was the government magazine. Government magazine means the fireworks were stored there, the gunpowder and things like that, explosives. And yeah. This is why when Swamiji used to tell Sri Ramakrishna that we'll go, this is in Kashipur, that they would go to Dakshineswar and meditate and start a dhuni, start a big fire there and sit around the fire and meditate. He would warn them, be careful, the authorities, will get nervous if you do it near this magazine because you could have a huge explosion. West of the bell tree was a row of tall pines that rustled in the wind. Below the trees flowed the Ganges, and to the south could be seen the sacred grove of the Panchavati. The dense trees and underbrush hid the temples. No noise of the outside world reached the bell tree. Master to M. But one cannot realize God without renouncing lust and gold. M. Why did not Vashishta say to Rama, O Rama, you may renounce the world if the world is outside God? Now, M is quoting Sri Ramakrishna's own words. And Thakur says this on several different occasions. And probably he said it a lot more often because we only have a small fraction of the things that he said. All the things he said when M wasn't there, Yeah, we don't know that, but he would give that illustration that at one time Rama felt tremendous renunciation, vairagya, and wanted to renounce everything. And so Dasharatha, the king Dasharatha, had Vashishta brought, who was the guru, you can say, for him. And he said, "Now reason with me. Uh, if this world is outside of God, then you can renounce the world." So he was saying that God is everywhere. Where do we go where God isn't there? So what is this giving up the world, leaving one thing, going to something else? God is everywhere. So Thakur would use that illustration to show that there's no place where God isn't, and that living in the world or outside the world, who can renounce the world? Sadhu doesn't renounce the world in the sense that he's living outside of it. It just means renouncing world, family life. All that it means. So M thinks, "Oh, I've made a good point. I'm simply quoting Thakur's words. He's said this so many times." Then he'll get a shock. Master smiling. He said that to Rama so that Rama might destroy Ravana. Rama accepted the life of a householder and married to fulfill that mission. So now he's saying it was a ruse. It wasn't 100%. He's just giving us some very higher teaching, that the highest teaching is remain in the world. Don't think about renouncing the world. You can realize God just as easily, all of that. He's saying, oh, okay, that of course, there's some truth to that, but there was another purpose. Rama was born for this mission. He was an avatar, that he had to destroy Ravana, and that whole play, all of that. So this will be a big shock to M. He's thinking that Thakur will back him up. Now we have to remember, so many things happened during this period that we can only explain as shock treatment. That Thakur somehow is taking this period to really melt down him and recast him in a new mold somehow. That he's putting him through so many different changes with regard to renunciation and living in the world and doing your duties, being a householder, being a monk. The head must be spinning, but by the end of it, it's at the end he'll say, and now you see, now you have some experience of things. Now you know you can go back, live with family and all of that, and says, yes, sir. So whatever he'd done, it's like he used to compare himself with the spiritual teacher to the doctor. That first lets the boil come to a head and then lances it. So he's doing something like that with him. So Master smiling, no. He said that to Rama so that Rama might destroy Ravana. Rama accepted the life of a householder and married to fulfill that mission. M stood there like a log, stunned and speechless. We have to feel sorry for him. Here, he's married with family, children, everything, and he's getting these strong teachings about renunciation, and that's been on his mind anyhow. That tremendous dilemma in his mind. Sri Ramakrishna went to the Panchavati on his way back to his room. M accompanied him. It was then about 10 o'clock. M, sir, is there no spiritual discipline leading to realization of the impersonal God? Now, remember when M first came to Sri Ramakrishna, that he argued with him about the impersonal, formless nature of God. Not so much impersonal, but without form. That was the first argument that he had. And still, he never lost that appreciation for that infinite transcendent, that Soham attitude. That he gained an appreciation for the others also, the attitude of the servant and the attitude of the child, to worship God as mother. Thakur one time says, yes, you're a worshiper of Shakti, to him. But he never lost that other side, and Thakur didn't want him to. Thakur never wanted anybody to say, no, that Nirguna Brahman, I'm not interested in that. He wanted to broaden them so that they accepted everything. Master. Yes, there is, but the path is extremely difficult. Now, what Sri Ramakrishna is going to say is exactly what we read in Gita. That the path of the infinite absolute, it requires a very high standard of detachment and renunciation. That is not for everyone. It's not easy for everyone. That the path of devotion is an easier path, but certainly God can be realized through that path. So he says, yes, there is, but the path is extremely difficult. After intense austerities, the rishis of olden times realized God as their innermost consciousness and experienced the real nature of Brahman. But how hard they had to work. They went out of their dwellings in the early morning and all day practiced austerities and meditation. Returning home at nightfall, they took a light supper of fruits and roots. But an aspirant cannot succeed in this form of spiritual discipline. This is our jnana yoga. Jnana yoga, Raja yoga, some type of combination. The spiritual disciplines will be mostly deep meditation and then also deep reflection on the nature of the self and other types of austerities. So an aspirant cannot succeed in this form of spiritual discipline if his mind is stained with worldliness, even in the slightest degree. The mind must withdraw totally from all objects of form, taste, smell, touch, and sound. Now, the reason for this is that the path of knowledge and the path of devotion have one very important distinction. The path of devotion, we can start with our present understanding of everything. We can start with our feeling that God is far off. I'm a devotee. He created me, but I don't feel that presence within. I want to worship God in dwelling in Vaikuntha. We can start out with that, with 100% belief that I'm this body and everything else. We can start out like that. And we go step by step by step, and we start feeling that the distinctions disappear. Swami says this love becomes like a rope drawing us closer to God, and gradually we start to get higher and higher and higher, and we start feeling God is not there, God is here, God dwells within, God dwells everywhere. And then, so we can do that step by step, stage by stage. The path of knowledge, we're supposed to be able to accept that ultimate final truth at the very beginning and act on that. So that means that at the very beginning, if I start out with Soham, I am he, and my feeling of I is with attachment to the body, and attachment to the body means attachment to the world, attachment to the near and dear ones and friends and sense pleasure and all of that. Then I won't be able to do it. It won't make sense. It won't be true. This when I say I am that, and that means Brahman, and I means this person. Yeah, it's not true. That the I as the self, that Atman. We're talking about the Atman, which is completely unattached to body, mind, senses, and everything. That's one with the Brahman. So unless we understand that at the very beginning, we'll have a false understanding. Now, we can have a good intellectual understanding and a desire to realize it and conviction and still have some attachment. If everybody has some attachment to the body and practice this. It's not that we have to become perfect before we can even practice it, but there should be some special sense of detachment and special type of renunciation. And this is why this path of knowledge was traditionally restricted to the sannyasins. Now everybody can practice it and everything, and Swamiji himself, he wanted everyone to at least have that understanding of these highest truths. He wanted to bring it down from the mountain cave to the marketplace of the world, but not that everyone can follow it exclusively. This is why Thakur liked to have this beautiful blend of devotion and knowledge. Jnana Mishra Bhakti, or however we call it. But now he's talking about this exclusive path of Jnana Yoga. So the mind must totally withdraw from all objects of form, taste, smell, touch, and sound. Only thus does it become pure. The pure mind is the same as the pure Atman. Now, we've come across this. Sometimes he'll say pure manis, Shuddha Mon, Shuddha Buddhi, Shuddha Atman, pure mind, pure intellect. And sometimes he'll say we merge the mind into Buddhi, we merge Buddhi into Atman. Now, we have to understand that this is a different model. This isn't our Sankhya model or yoga model where the mind is an instrument. According to Sankhya, the mind is an instrument. It's composed of the three gunas. It belongs to Prakriti. It's separate from Purusha, but Purusha can be reflected in it. This is that relationship. That mind, when it's purified, will never be Brahman. It'll be a perfect instrument which will allow us to realize our true nature. But we won't identify that with the Brahman, according to the Sankhya philosophy. So this is more this idea that we have this one ocean of consciousness, and the mind is like that wave that we can distinguish that wave from the ocean, but when that wave settles down and loses itself in the ocean, then there's no distinction anymore. So that'll be like that pure mind. Swamiji talks about this Chidakasha and Chittakasha. I like that example. We can say air and ether. Ether meaning pure space, and air meaning air with air molecules and things like that. If we have just a certain area, and we can remove all of the molecules, air molecules, essentially create a vacuum, then there's no distinction between air and space. We have our Air and Space Museum. So they're all one and the same. So the space will fill 100% of the room, and the air will fill in the beginning, say, of course, this won't be a scientific thing, but say that each air molecule is that there's 10 feet apart. So I say there'll be maybe 50 of them in the room, something like that. Now, the space in between all of that is space, but the air molecules are also within space. So the space is always 100%. Always 100%. Empty space is filled with them. So that's not affected by, no matter how many molecules there are, that's not affected. That's completely, but we remove all of the molecules, and then there's no distinction whatsoever. So when the mind goes beyond all of these modifications, vrittis, and that mind is just perfectly calm, then that means the waves have just melded back into the ocean, and then it's one with the ocean, but it's always one with it. It's never separate from it. So we can't have air molecules. Where will they find a place to exist if not in space? They have to be in space. So it's not like where the molecule is, there's no ether in that point. It's only in between. It's everywhere. So when we have a thought, it's within consciousness. When there's no thought, it's consciousness.
So we thought that Chidakash means cosmic consciousness.
No.
Chittakash is, what is...
No. Chidakasha means pure consciousness, Brahman. That pure consciousness. So you can take it even with you, that you have this Chidakasha now. Everything that you experience is experienced within consciousness. But the particulars of it, anything that you experience through the mind, that'll be the Chittakasha, but you can't experience that without the witnessing consciousness there. So the witness is always there. If there's nothing to witness, it remains there. When there's something to witness, it's not like it disappears. It's not like if you put objects in water, you have a displacement theory. That an object in water will displace that water. So that you have the object in the water, but the water won't be there when the object is there. This is different. This is space. No matter what you put in it, it doesn't affect it. So this is that idea. Gagana sadrisam. that this infinite absolute reality, it's like they say sky, but it really means this empty space, this akasha. I like this. I like both models. They're just different models. They're both very, very helpful. We can think of the mind as the perfect instrument. We're trying to perfect that instrument. Or we can think of it as just this wave on the surface of this infinite absolute reality of the Brahman, Satchidananda, that ocean of consciousness. So the pure mind is the same as the pure Atman, but such a mind must be altogether free from lust and gold. Because then again, if we have these passions, these attachments, again we're connected to the body, and again the mind will start breaking out into these vrittis, these vasanas. All these desires will come. That type of mind won't be able to become still. So that's that connection. That's why this pure heart and pure mind go together. Pure heart means that free from all of these passions and attachments and desires and all of those things, and that pure mind means a quiet mind, this translucent, this prasada. We have this in chapter 2, the beautiful understanding of that mind as perfectly calm and peaceful and perfectly transparent and everything. So it's the grace of the mind. When it becomes pure, one has another experience. One realizes God alone is the doer, and I am his instrument. One does not feel oneself to be absolutely necessary to others, either in their misery or in their happiness. See, this experience, if the mind can become perfectly still and empty, then we realize that this ego has no substantial value, that can disappear. That there's no ultimate reality to this ego. This ego is just an idea. It's just this our sense of who we are. It's very, very much like the modern psychological understanding of ego, even Freudian idea of the ego. It's self-image. That's all it is. There's no ahankara as a structure of consciousness within consciousness, as we find in Sankhya. The ego is simply false identification with all these, with the mind, with the our samskaras, with our upadhis, all of these things. So when we realize that I still exist, that real I, that higher I still exists, when there's no sense of the ego, and then we know, then we see that it's just a phantom, the phantom ego, but it causes so much trouble. And then Tagore is very practical. They'll say, so it's a phantom, but it's not going to go away easily. So utilize it, take the help of it. But here he's saying we have that highest realization. First thing that will go is this sense of identification with our personality, with our background, with our ethnicity, all of these other things that go into this ego sense. One does not feel oneself to be absolutely necessary to others, either in their misery or in their happiness, because there's a lot of pride there. How will you get along without me? I have to be there to help. So some humility, real humility will come from this. Once a wicked man beat into unconsciousness a monk who lived in a monastery. On regaining consciousness, he was asked by his friends, "Who is feeding you milk?" The monk said, "He who beat me is now feeding me." Yes, sir, I know that story. Now, you don't say that to Sri Ramakrishna. There's many, many times that not just him, others will say that. I know that. Yeah. They say, yeah, you know it, huh? Then they'll say, Dharana Jai. You have to assimilate that. It's not enough to say, I know it. The M is still a little bit peaked from all of this. He's been beaten up a little bit today. Yes, sir, I know that story, Master. It is not enough to know it. One must assimilate its meaning. Dharana. Thakur uses this word a lot. That we have to make it part of ourselves. It's not just part of the intellect, but part of the fabric of our being. so that we don't think of ourselves as this ego sense. It is the thought of worldly objects that prevents the mind from going into samadhi. One becomes established in samadhi when one is completely rid of worldliness. It is possible for me to give up the body in samadhi, but I have a slight desire to enjoy the love of God and the company of his devotees. Bhakti bhakta. Therefore, I pay little attention to my body. There's another kind of samadhi called unmana samadhi. One attains it by suddenly gathering the dispersed mind. You understand what that is, don't you? M. Yes, sir. Yes, it is the sudden withdrawal of the dispersed mind to the ideal. Now, Tagore talks about so many different types of samadhi. There's one conversation when Pandit comes and they're having a nice time. Do you understand? Jihad, everything. And then Tagore will start saying, then there's this Chaitanya Samadhi, Unmana Samadhi, Sthita Samadhi, all the different things. And then the Pandit says, okay, I don't know all these things. That's too much. But we know how Tagore knew all these things. I mean, he knew through experience, but even the terms of these things, how much technical information he had. We don't know what traditions all of these things are from. I don't, at least. There's Unmana Samadhi and Chaitanya Samadhi, all these different things. But this is one way of understanding how the mind can come down from samadhi. We wonder, can it ever come down? Tagore says you'll get stuck there, give up the body in 21 days. But there are certain times, and if we have a little desire, there's a little karma. If we don't get too far up, we don't fall asleep on the roof, we can come back down, all different things that he'll talk about. So this type, he says, that samadhi does not last long. Worldly thoughts intrude. Now, how worldly can they be if one has had samadhi? They won't be really what we think of as worldly thoughts. It can just be, of the family or something. It won't be any low types of thought. And destroy it. The yogi slips down from his yoga. At Kamarpukur, I've seen the mongoose living in its hole up in the wall. It feels snug there. Sometimes people tie a brick to its tail. He used to tell how the kids they would play when in Kamarpukur that they would do this. Then the pull of the brick makes it come out of its hole. Every time the mongoose tries to be comfortable inside the hole, it has to come out because of the pull of the brick. Such is the effect of brooding on worldly objects that it makes the yogi stray from the path of yoga. Now, this is after this samadhi. So this type of samadhi, it won't be that very highest type that when the mind really gets immersed in that, it's very difficult to bring the mind back down. But still, any type of samadhi is good. Huh? We don't know. It has to be some transforming power from that. Worldly people may now and then experience samadhi. Now, he's so confusing. Huh? Here we hear that he's absolutely free from all desires and everything to have that experience. Now he says worldly people may now and then experience samadhi. What does it say for worldly people? Shongshari. Vishari. So it really means worldly people. Sometimes it may just mean people living in the world, but here it means, Vishari. The people who have some attachment to sense enjoyment may now and then experience samadhi. The lotus blooms, no doubt, when the sun is up, but its petals close again when the sun is covered by a cloud. Worldly thought is the cloud. Now, we may say that the samadhi means, yes, the mind gets gathered together for just a brief second or something, some glimpse, something like that. But very hard to know. M. Isn't it possible to develop both jnana and bhakti by the practice of spiritual discipline? So still, now, M has been with Sri Ramakrishna for like a year and a half, over a year now, almost 2 years. Still, these little questions are there, and analyzing his own mind. Does he really like this path of devotion or this path of knowledge? Does he really like the impersonal absolute or this relationship with God? All these things are percolating in his mind, it seems. Master, through the path of bhakti, a man may attain them both. If it is necessary, God gives him the knowledge of Brahman. But a highly qualified aspirant may develop both jnana and bhakti at the same time. So the first time he's saying that we follow the path of bhakti, and then we get to the roof, and then we feel that oneness. Now he's saying that there's some who can do both at the same time, kind of combine them in their spiritual practice. Such is the case with the ishwarakotis. So now he's really restricting it. Chaitanya, for example, ishwarakoti. Chaitanya, the avatar is included in the ishwarakoti. Thakur always considered him an avatar also. But the case of ordinary devotees is different. There are 5 kinds of light: the light of a lamp, the light of various kinds of fire, the light of the moon, the light of the sun, and lastly, the combined light of the sun and moon. Bhakti is the light of the moon, because cooling, and jnana, the light of the sun, scorching. It'll burn up all the ignorance. Sometimes it is seen that the sun has hardly set when the moon rises in the sky. You'll see both of them together. In an incarnation of God, one sees at the same time the sun of knowledge and the moon of love. By the way, this is Rakhi Purnima. Maybe last night in some places they celebrated in India, the full moon night, and also the birthday of Swami Niranjanananda, one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Okay, so we'll stop here. This is page 351. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukamathudavikraham Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.